Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today I am doing a discussion video talking about the new structure deck R, Devil's Gate, Dark Worlds, finally confirmed getting their next structure deck. Hopefully this will come with some really awesome support. This deck needs 7 or 8 cards, and hopefully they get the right ones to really help put this archetype together, because I would say the biggest thing about this archetype is it just feels like super loose, kind of spread out, and not as consistent as you'd want it to be. So we're going to be going through pretty much most of the Dark World cards. We'll skim through them. We won't spend too much time on them. And then we'll talk about some generic cards that could be something to consider as we get support. Just don't forget that these cards are there that are going to already kind of be a part of this archetype. And then at the end, we'll talk about what I want to see to kind of help this archetype. What I just want to see from the new support to really get it going. But yeah, let's start off with our cards here. Moving through Snow. This is one of the, I don't want to say newer. Hold on, let me move my face so it's not covering up the effects here. Okay, but first off is Snow. So all the Dark Worlds, most of them, by the way, have this main system where if they're discarded by card effect, not cost, cannot be cost, don't forget about that, they do one thing that's pretty good, but if they're discarded by an opponent's card effect, they do that one thing and then an additional thing. It usually leads to a +2, but it depends. So this one will add any Dark World card from deck to hand, and then if it's by your opponent, and special summon it straight from the deck, which is pretty cool. Love that this is Dark World card that really opens up possibilities moving forward to extra searchability for spells and traps as well. You have Beige. Simply, if he's discarded by card effect, he summons himself back from the grave. Brow will draw you a card, but if it's your opponent, you'll draw 2. Really strong. Nice draw power from him. Kaki is if he's discarded, target a monster on the field and destroy it. This one has never really been a great one historically, but I do think that if the archetype becomes like a legit engine that very consistently is like searching whatever Dark Worlds you want and has really good ways to like quick effect discard on the opponent's turn, then it is possible that Kaki becomes, yes, a brick, but also a searchable piece of interruption where you search him turn 1 and then he's just in the hand so you can quick effect discard him to pop on your opponent's turn. I could see a world where that is a thing. Gren's kind of the same thing, but for spells and traps. Ceruli. So Ceruli is a very important card to introduce here because this is like where Konami seemed to be wanting to push the Dark Worlds, and it's this system where they started getting effects that forced your opponent to activate an effect to make you discard. And so the idea was like you're trying to force your opponent into giving you those opponent discard triggers on your more powerful Dark World monsters. So this guy, if he's discarded by a card effect, he can summon himself to the opponent's graveyard, and when he's summoned, he forces himself to activate an effect that forces you to discard a card. So it's kind of a way there, maybe like same way as Kaki. I can maybe see a world where like the deck has consistent lines to search him and set him up for the opponent's turn to get you a really powerful discard interruption, but we'll see. Brawn. Brawn is the only monster in the entire archetype that actually facilitates you getting extra discards. It's a really bad version of it, but it is something that I want to note because we could see better versions of Brawn, essentially, as more Dark Worlds that actually have really good effects that allow you to discard, but not in a super minus way, you know? What if we got like a cycle effect, like a new Dark World that like when he's summoned, it actually be a normal summon for the deck, draw 1 card, then discard a card. So that way you get the body on the field, you're cycling, but you're also going to get a plus from the monster you're discarding, hopefully. Then you get to the big ones. So the big ones have more powerful effects generally because they can't be normal summoned and they're a little bit brickier. Silva, most of them summon themselves and then do something else. So Silva summons himself, but if he's discard off an opponent's card, he returns exactly 2 cards from your opponent's hand to the bottom of their deck. That's insane, dude. Holy shit. Lucent, also decent. If he's discarded, he summons himself, but then you can special summon a fiend monster from your deck to either field. Excuse me. And that's any fiend monster in the entire game. You could play something like Lilith, Lady of Lament, to get access to certain trap cards. This one's definitely a strong one as well. Then you have Gold. Gold, one of the more powerful interruptions as well. He summons himself if he's discarded, but off your opponent, he then targets 2 cards and destroys them. Very powerful, pop 2 and a big body on the field. Definitely like that. Rainbow's another interesting to note, one to note because He doesn't actually trigger if you discard him. He only triggers if he's discarded by the opponent. But he summons himself, and then when he's summoned that way, he can destroy all monsters or all spell traps your opponent controls. So if it is an interruption and Konami does push the deck in that direction of force your opponent to make you discard, maybe he could be have a slot in the deck. But to be honest, gold kind of popping 2 cards kind of covers this without being as bricky anyway. So, meh. And then Grapha. Grapha's insane. We all know about Grapha. So you can special summon him from your graveyard by returning a Dark World monster you control to the hand. Very nice for reloading Dark Worlds back into the hand for more discard fodder, and putting a big body on the field. He's 27. And then if this card is discarded to the graveyard by a card effect, target a card your opponent controls, destroy it. Then if he was discarded by an opponent's card, look at a random card in your opponent's hand. Then if it was a monster, you can summon it to your field. Pretty crazy. That bonus effect isn't the greatest thing in the world. I mean, because normally in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh, if you are looking at a random card in your opponent's hand and it's not turn 1, it's probably, and it's a monster, it's probably just a hand trap. You can still get hand knowledge, so it's nice, but it's not as powerful as some of the other bonus effects. But we're still popping a card, so he is still another interruptive guy that then also gives you really good board presence with the big body. He's also not once per turn. By the way, I don't know if any of these have been once per turn so far. This deck has rarely any. Okay, newer card. This art's actually not old at all. So yeah, this card's actually still pretty new, last couple years. Target a level 4 lower fiend in your grave, special summon it, then discard a fiend. Do give up 2 cards from the hand, but you get a monster on field and trigger something off the discard. So this could be a decent card. It's also a Dark World, so it is searchable via name. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Dark World dealings. A lot of people hate this card, and I kind of feel that. In modern day Yu-Gi-Oh, there's just so many decks that play cards that want to be engraved in the first place that giving them a cycle is like going first. You're just giving that, like allowing them to fix their hand to play better going second, and maybe even just go plus because they discard something that's better engraved anyway. So I really don't love this card overall, but who knows? We'll see. Dark World Lightning. This card only pops set cards on the field. It destroys it, then you discard a card. Interesting, but maybe we could see a power crept version of this for the new structure deck, but also stay searchable for like really powerful stuff. I mean, like maybe we could see it be like this, but maybe it's a trap and it's like pop 2. And then discard a fiend from your hand. Like, you know what I mean? Give you a little bit higher ceiling, more removal, not as targeted removal and only sets, and you can trigger a Dark World by discarding it. That could be something spicy. And then you have Gates. Gates kind of helps you just cycle. Banish a fiend from your grave to discard a fiend and draw a card. So you do kind of go raw +1 here. You just have to make sure you can set up the grave. The 300 attack buff is whatever, but it's an okay card. It does have Dark World in the name, so it could be a card for like kind of the grind game. You just want to get it set up early because it's going to allow you to just run through your deck and plus kind of every turn, hopefully. Into the traps. Target 2 Dark World monsters to your grave, add them to your hand. This is not a Dark World card. It's pretty slow. It needs setup and grave. I don't think this card is that great, but who knows. This card is the other form of the card that where Konami really tried to push that mechanic of making your opponent discard automatically. So it says when your opponent activates a monster effect and you have 3 or more cards in hand, you can target a Dark World on the field, return it to the hand, and if you do, the opponent's activated effect becomes discard a random card from your opponent's hand. Couple problems with this card, like it requires you to have a Dark World on the field. You have to have 3 cards in hand. That's the real brutal part, is like if you're going first, like to set this up, like how am I going to maintain 3 cards in hand, set this, and have a Dark World on field? That means my entire play was just normal summon a Dark World, set this, most likely, in a lot of scenarios. Because the deck wants to discard, it wants to get stuff out of the hand. But I do love that it like changes a monster effect, so it's essentially negating a monster while giving you the chance to high roll with a big discard. But it's random. That's the other part, is it is random. It doesn't let you just target. You can't choose what you're discarding. So I think there are some really big ways they could kind of power creep this, but still maintain that same idea. But I just think this one is has a couple too many drawbacks. Dark Smog, actually a pretty spicy card. I actually like this card a lot. It's a continuous trap, so you can just do it at every turn. Once per turn, target a monster in your opponent's graveyard. Discard a fiend, and if you do, banish that target. A good way to like have a consistent way to like every turn trigger a Dark World, while also having anti-graveyard synergy. Biggest downside of this is not a Dark World card. It's not a Dark World card. It is generic, but it's not going to be searchable, most likely. So definitely the downside, but I do think this card has some great benefits. And then we get to some of the splashable stuff, right? Dangers. We know dangers work with this engine insanely well. That's definitely something to keep an eye on because there have been builds that just hyper-focus making rank 8s. So you have like the dangers. You play Bigfoot, maybe Thunderbird to help play going second and just be general good extenders. Jackalope, Nessie, Tsuchinoko also there if the deck wants to link spam. I don't know exactly the route. We have to see the new support before we decide that. There's also Fableds, and Fableds, again, kind of like the Dangers, trigger just by being discarded. Not even, they don't need to be by effect like the Dark Worlds do, so there's definitely some synergy here. We'll definitely have to check out. And they got support like 2 years ago, so that's definitely another route to check out to see how good that recent support is. I know we don't love it, but listen, this deck does not have a normal summon that wants to activate its effect, and Fateful Adventure discards as effect as well. So this is an engine that helps you get interruption, play through interruption, and get an additional discard. The synergy is really good. I mean, we'll see by the time, I mean, it could be a year before we get the Dark World structure deck in the TCG. This may not even be playable as like an engine because of bans and whatnot, because of how highly played it is right now. Branded Opening, another funny card. It does lock you into fusion summons, but it discards for effect and gets you to an Eluber to kind of get into that fusion engine. So again, kind of like the Fateful Adventure card, like gets you into your engine and kind of gets you a free discard for the deck anyway. Pretty cool. Dark Destruction, or Card Destruction, whatever. You're probably not playing this card because, again, like the Dark World Dealings, you don't want to let your opponent get a bunch of free cards in grave. But it could be a big powerhouse card in your deck. Then Groza. This is a weird card that got overlooked by a lot of decks. He can only be made with a non-tuner Fiend, but he has a quick effect that lets you target an effect monster on the field, discard a monster as effect, and negate it. So it's kind of like a walking impermanence that can discard a danger or a Dark World on the opponent's turn to get maybe another card. Maybe pop with a Grapho, or a pop with a Kaki, whatever, or just an extension. And then he gives himself protection effects. It's pretty decent. Definitely a card to keep in mind if we can make him consistently. And the last card here is Paleozoic Dynamiscus. There's a lot of traps that discard, but they discard as cost. And this is the only one that's like really solid to me. Discards as effect, and it's just a target and banish, which is really solid. This card's always been good in certain formats. We've seen this be playable in BA. I think this deck has a similar situation of if this deck ends up going a more control route, this card could be something interesting, especially if we're like somehow able to trigger like Lucent really consistently. You could literally go like straight, like do something weird turn one where like maybe they give us some weird cards that let us like force our opponent to make us discard turn one, and maybe you discard Lucent and then he summons himself and a Lilith, and then you can Lilith for Dynamiscus, and now you have like an interruption. And you've got the discard to keep extending with the Dark Worlds in hand. I don't know, just some ideas. That's all the Dark World stuff and generic stuff that are worth going over. As far as what I feel like the deck needs, this is it. I think the deck doesn't have enough consistency right now. It really feels like it needs more something. I don't know if it's a spell card that searches Dark Worlds. I don't know if it's like a normal summon or like some situation between 2 or 3 cards that give you the ability to search different Dark Worlds or search different Dark World spell or traps or whatever. It just feels like it doesn't get to its own stuff enough, and that's why to this point in the last couple of years it's had to really rely on the Danger engine, right? As an engine. It needs to potentially use the Fabled stuff, other engines, other stuff that helps you discard, and that's not really where you want to be. The other thing to consider, and I think this deck has this similar problem with like Light Swarms and even Shaddolls arguably, but Shaddolls have just gotten such good support and pairs with so many good things, it's kind of been covered up. But this deck feels like you have all of these Dark Worlds, and by the way, their only effects, most of them, is just when they're discarded. So if you draw them without a way to discard them, they really aren't doing anything for you. They are all essentially bricks in the hand if you don't draw them with the prerequisite cards to help you discard. So I always wondered, I was like, how do you fix that inherently? I guess inherently you could have a Link 1 that like says when it's Link summoned, add a Dark World from grave back to hand, then discard a card. So that way, even if you just open Snow, she could trigger herself by herself. You go normal Snow, Link for the Link 1, add back the Snow and discard it, and then Snow searches you another Dark World card. That's something. For sure. I don't know the exact route they'd want to go, but it feels like the archetype really needs a handful of just power crept versions of cards that let you discard. We at least need enough that let you, like, that you're going to see consistently enough that get you enough power and plus you, instead of like a lot of these cards are just 1-for-1s. But let you just consistently see them with the Dark Worlds to trigger them, because if you see a whole handful of Dark Worlds, you're kind of screwed. Will they circumvent it that way? I don't know, with something like a Link 1. Or will we just end up getting a bunch of good spells, maybe some more monsters, maybe some normal summonable monsters that have really good effects that help you, like, search a Dark World, then discard a card, right? So essentially lets you, like, discard from deck if that's what you want to do. Hopefully giving us some really good consistent play lines that we can set up, like, very easily. And if they're going to stick with that route with the like the brainwashing, I really just hope that they just kind of power creep this card. This card has too many requirements, 3 cards in hand. You have to have a Dark World on field, and the discard is random. It's just so brutal, right? Like, there's too many requirements. We just need, like, kind of to power creep this, or, like I said, just some traps that have Dark World in the name so they're searchable, and say, like, target 2 cards on the field, shuffle them into the deck, and if you do, discard a card. Something like that, right? That is really, really solid, or discard a Fiend, maybe specifically, would really potentially be, like, huge for the deck, especially if they're very consistently able to be set up. Because right now it just feels like the deck doesn't plus hard enough. It doesn't consistently get you where you want to go. You're not consistently getting to, like, the engine, and the payoff just isn't fully there either. And that's what I want to see. Is I really just want to see them take this archetype and really push it together and give it a clear, distinct, like, goal, win condition there. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Hopefully it made sense to you guys. Of course, if you made it this far, sorry we went through so many cards, but I felt like there were a lot of... This is one of those archetypes that has a lot of different things it can work well with, so I wanted to go kind of a little more in depth there. But thank you so much if you made it this far. Let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts on Dark Worlds. What kind of cards do you want to see? And keep in mind, 7 to 8 cards. You could do a lot with 7 to 8 cards, so be greedy. Definitely. We should hold Konami to high standards on this stuff. For sure. But... that's going to do it from here. Thank you so much for watching as always. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet and you want to see more stuff like this down the line. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.